Alright, in one of our previous videos we covered packing textures briefly, but I want to cover it again here so that it would be easy to refer to later. Now, when an image file is used in Blender, it's not packed or embedded into the .blend file. And as we've seen, Blender does have functionality to allow us to embed or pack files into the .blend file, but let's talk briefly about why you would or wouldn't want to do that. I'll start by saying that it's very good practice to have a file system in place that makes sense to you and is easy to refer back to months or even years later. This is the first step in not having to hunt for textures with an associated project if or when you come back to it after some time. But this begs the question, why not just always pack your textures? Well, you certainly can. However, as you progress and your scenes get larger and more complicated, your file sizes will grow substantially. Packing textures for a large complex scene can grow an already large file considerably, using a very large amount of storage space. Having a system in place that accesses the textures that were already on your system anyway is much more efficient in terms of storage. So that's a good reason not to pack textures. However, perhaps you're working with someone else and need the ability to share a .blend file. Now, sharing the file as well as the associated textures separately can become cumbersome, and the people receiving the file will still have to attach the file path appropriately. This becomes a time-consuming process when packing textures becomes much more useful and a good practice to follow. Alright, so now we know why we might not want to pack textures, and we know why we might want to pack textures. So let's take a look at actually doing it. We'll just use our default scene for this exercise, and we'll use the brick JPEG from earlier lessons. So first, let's click Ctrl S just to simply save our default scene. I'll name mine Pack Brick. And I'll click Save the Blender file twice to acknowledge and commit the save. If we looked at our saved file, we can see how small it is. Alright, now let's make sure our cube is selected and open the material editor. I'll name my material Brick Cube. Then in the texture editor, I'll name my new texture Brick Text. And I'll select Image or Movie as my type. Then under Image, I'll select Open and navigate to my desktop where my brick texture is. Now just a note, my desktop is not a great file system for maintaining textures. Anyway, I'll open the file. Note that my source is a single image and its file path comes from its desktop location. This tells us that Blender will look there for the image file whenever it's rendering. Now if we were to move that texture elsewhere, the file path would be broken and our cube would no longer render with the brick texture applied. Alright, in the mapping panel, I'll change the projection from flat to cube. And let's hit F12 to render. Alright, I'll hit F11 to go back, and this time I'll save the file again. Then I'll go ahead and tell Blender to open up a new file, which is kind of the equivalent of closing Blender for our pack scene. I'll then go to Open Recent and reopen our scene. Now we can see that our brick texture is intact, as well as its file path. If we hit F12 to render, our brick texture is applied as it should be, because our blend file saved the path, and the path is still valid. However, if we were to share this file with someone else, the brick will not render as the saved file path won't be valid for the other user. So let's look at packing our texture. If we click the Pack File button next to the path listing, we can see that Blender grays out the path listing, and that indicates that the texture is now packed into the .blend file. Alright, I'll save the scene again, And now let's have a look at the size of the file. It's considerably larger. So you can see how fast texture memory could become an issue in a large scene. However, the trade-off is that now we can share the file with another user without them having to set anything up to use it. Just as a test, once you've got your texture packed into the blend file, go ahead and delete the texture from its location. Now if you tell Blender to render your scene again, you'll see that the brick still renders, as Blender is no longer tethered to the file path. Alright, that should cover texture packing. I'll see everyone in the next video.